Recently, I sat down with my friend Harry Campbell. Harry has been the rideshare guy, one of the leading news sources on ride hail, but he also has a driverless car podcast. And so for that podcast, we discussed Waymo's big incident with the power outage in San Francisco in December of 2025. In this discussion, you'll hear all sorts of fun about what went on, what really went on, and what it means. Here it is from my YouTube channel.
Brad, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, and Happy New Year almost. I don't know if we're going to air this, but the year's almost over here.
I think we will air this in 2026. So we're doing this, I guess, I don't know if it's from the past or the future, but excited to have you on. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this is I feel like this story, I don't know what I'm going to title this episode yet. I'm thinking maybe Great Waymo Outage of 2025, but it still seems like it's picking up steam.
I mean, certainly, there's a lot of people. I was surprised by it, so I think it's not unreasonable that people are surprised by this. Trying to piece together why something like that happened to Waymo, what it's a harbinger of, I think is most important. In fact, one of the messages that, if we get right into this, is that self-driving cars, like the Waymo, are going to make mistakes, and they're going to continue to make mistakes for the rest of their existence, because perfection is not an option. And so what really matters is, obviously, you care about the mistakes and you care about their severity, but mostly you care about their repeatability. Because the great thing about robots is when they make a mistake, well, not they, but their masters learn from it. We hope they learn from it.
Yeah.
And they don't make the same mistake again, which is very different from human beings. Human beings will make the same mistake, and even that human being will make the same mistake, but the other human beings will certainly make it. And that bodes very well, all right, because these vehicles are going to constantly improve. So when we look at these projects and these teams, I think the right thing is to judge. Are they on a path of improvement? Do they show that that's their goal? Are they doing their best? Not are they doing perfectly? If we focus on individual incidents, we could easily get distracted from the real question, which is, are they putting us on a broad trend towards the goals that we're after, like improved safety, like improved traffic? Are we getting to our goals, and is this the best path? That's the real question.
Yeah, well said. I'm excited to dig into all of that with you today. And I want to start with maybe some of the facts that happen, since we're going to have a lot of conjecture and analysis and opinion on this. Sort of, I'll call it less of an interview today, more of a conversation. But maybe, I guess the thing that I've noted is, just kind of timeline wise, right? Okay, December 20th, right? This was a Saturday before Christmas. I think you noted in your article, this was a pretty busy day. Major power outage struck San Francisco. Don't really care about the reason why, but it was 1/3 of households. I thought that was kind of interesting. 125,000 households. I looked it up. There's 380,000 households in San Francisco. San Francisco also has 1,000 cars in San Francisco. There's
actually 1,000 cars in the Bay Area. So I would guess they have more in San Francisco than any other town in the Bay Area, but probably 600 probably in the city, I would guess.
And then I also looked up that San Francisco has 1,292 traffic signals. I don't know if that's important or not, but I was trying to think about factual, objective things that I could look up. So those were sort of the 4 or 5. Anything else, hasn't been talked about enough, or that you think sort of stands out in that timeline?
Well, it's hard to get the specific facts on this, but a lot of people who've talked about this have assumed that there was a cell phone outage here. And I have not been able to get confirmation that this happened. Waymo has not in any way attempted to blame this on cell phone outage. Most cell phone towers have at least 4 to 8 hours of battery, and most of them have generators. So even if the cell phone towers did run out of power and shut down, that wouldn't have happened until about 8 hours into the event. So I don't think that that's a factor. Many people are assuming that's a factor.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's sort of a TBD, may not have been an issue. We'll get into the cell service and if or how or why that matters. I guess objectively, though, the power went out, lights went out. We saw videos of signals out. So that sort of happened. And I guess that's where and when the chaos started for Waymo. And I think the videos that were shared on social media, I think were basically Waymo's stuck, I would say, blocking intersections, blocking traffic, not necessarily pulled over. Is that kind of what you saw?
Yeah, I mean the worst videos show 4 or 5 Waymos
some of
caused
them
in
were
an
quite a lot.
intersection. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's counted or how many different videos. Now, another fact, at least, or it's a statement of Waymo,
Mm,
they say that they successfully navigated intersections on their own 7,000 times during
yeah.
this outage. So they were doing, we don't have any videos of that.
Yeah.
And so we do have to be very careful about selective attention, because I would love to get, and Waymo has not given data about how many times something went wrong. Now, I think broadly, well, this
Well, and
is a
that's a
very
good point.
interesting
You wrote
problem.
that in your last article. And also, I don't think that Waymo is lying about that 7,000 number, but I think the omission is what you're referring to. And I was hoping you read that in my newsletter, but I think you also came up with that idea on your own is, okay, what about the signals that they did not traverse successfully?
Yeah.
What is the denominator there? If it's 10,000, 7,000 divided by 10,000, not so good. If it's 7,100, okay, pretty good. And so I'm always very skeptical of tech companies when they omit
Yeah.
certain data, if that makes sense.
And I'm going to be critical of Waymo here for the transparency on this.
Mhm.
I understand their fear. And by the way, the public reaction to these events makes them feel more fear, right?
Yeah.
They're saying, "Oh my God, we if we admit something, it'll be all, people will take it all out." And so they have this instinct, and they close in. And sadly, I saw this happen with Cruise
Mhm.
quite a lot just before their end. And of course, their end came from creating a culture of secrecy inside the company,
Yeah.
which did them in. I mean, there were other factors as well, but the culture of secrecy was probably the biggest thing that led to the fall of Cruise. And so
Mhm.
I encourage Waymo to, do what they can to avoid that. The problem is the public isn't very understanding, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of incorrect assertions going on about this, or speculations which are not labeled as speculations. And I understand why they get this fear. So this natural desire to circle the wagons, but I don't think in the end it serves us well.
Yeah.
So 7,000 carried well. And also, I mean, I've seen many people write about this who just assumed the cars couldn't handle a disabled traffic signal at all. And that's clearly not true. I mean, they do
Yeah.
that. They've
I
said they
mean,
do that.
let's put a pin in that. I mean, that is, I would say, the 7,000 from Waymo. I don't know if I would quite call that a fact, but that's a fact from Waymo. Let's call it that. And then, but I think one fact we do know, and you pointed this out, is that Waymos can handle dead intersection. This has happened many times before, right? On an individual or small number of bases, Waymos can handle this, right?
Yeah, I mean, they know the law, and we're going to get into what I think is the real cause of this in a minute. But
Mhm.
the law is treated as a four-way stop,
Gotcha.
and Waymos know that. Now, I'm going to get into what Waymo has said about four-way stops, because
Mhm.
in fact, I know this in a sense, even so I worked at Waymo, but it was now 12, 13 years ago. So I'm not up on any
Some
insider
things have
information
changed.
about the latest thing. But probably the very first thing that Waymo realized, and we're talking about or it wasn't even called Waymo then, it was Google's chauffeur project, was that four-way stops were sort of the first thing they realized, oh, wait, we cannot drive like a grandmother,
Mhm.
right? Because the original instinct of everyone putting a car out here is, be very timid,
Right.
be very conservative, do everything you can to be safe, especially when you're young and immature and not ready to handle things. And they learned if you do that at four-way stops, you don't go anywhere.
Mhm.
And so their sort of first big revelation was says, we've found we have to be assertive at four-way stops. And I think that's going to play a role in final understanding of the situation.
Gotcha. So, anything else as far as timeline that we didn't cover? I mean, I guess one other thing, I didn't actually see any videos of Waymos actually stuck at intersections longer than 30 to 45 seconds. Did you see any videos where it was 15 minutes of a Waymo stuck at an intersection? Because I saw a lot of comments kind of back and forth. Oh, they were stuck for that long or they weren't. Is there anything factual you saw around that?
I haven't done a complete survey of the videos. Maybe
Mhm.
somebody who's more diligent, like
And look pretty
Mr.
hard.
Campbell, wants to do that. I'd be interested in someone getting that result. But no, I don't know how long it was. It was certainly long enough for people to notice, and it was certainly long enough, at least in 2 or 3 intersections, for several Waymos to join the
Yeah.
fun.
So, okay. So the only other final things on the timeline, I guess, is that, Waymo sort of they paused the robotaxi service in San
Yeah,
Francisco, and then they came
about
out
about 7 or 8 p.m. I think they
right about
paused it.
7 or 8 p.m. And then I believe it was, let me pull up the exact date when Waymo did their blog post. I want
About
to say it was
about
Tuesday, right?
18 hours later, they restored service,
Oh, they restored service, and
and then
then
briefly shut it down again because of some flooding. So
well, that was a few days or a week later. Don't confuse people with that one. And then December 23rd, so that was 1, 2, 3 days later, they released this blog post. Although they started releasing some comments, I think,
Yeah.
to CNBC and others, a day or two after the event, sort of hinting at this explanation that they gave, which we'll get into. But then they had their kind of official blog post, autonomously navigating the real world, lessons from the PG&E outage. Is that kind of the main items on the timeline?
Yes, I think so. Anyway, and in that post, of course, I mean, again, if it's again a statement from Waymo, but I think it's unlikely they'd lie about it.
Yeah,
That they
fair.
have said that they had a backlog in their system which handles requests for assistance from vehicles, and that this was the cause of the congestion.
So, for those who may not know, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, boy, people don't know about this because it's complex. So there are a lot of
Well,
people, in
Waymo
fact,
also doesn't talk about their teleoperations much.
I mean, they talk about it. So everyone does it.
Right.
And so a lot of people say, well, these vehicles are fully autonomous. I have a little joke that when a vehicle's autonomous, you can say, take me to the office. It says, I'd rather go to the beach.
Yeah.
That's a fully autonomous vehicle. These vehicles are not that, but they are, at least Waymo's vehicles, they say, are mostly autonomous, that they're,
Mhm.
they're driving 99% of the time entirely on their own. But nobody is building one or even intends to build one that doesn't occasionally rely on human beings to
Yeah.
go after the long tail of complexity on the roads. It's a dream for someday, the so-called level 5.
Sure.
I hate the levels. I'm their biggest enemy. They shouldn't exist. But level 5 actually made sense because level 5 is this actually doesn't happen. This is to
Yeah.
tell you that we don't do this. We do less than that, and we're still useful. And that's what happens. So anyway, there are several levels, however, to use that word in a different sense, of assistance you could give to a vehicle. And the most extreme is what a German company called Vey does in Las Vegas. They have remote drivers,
Right.
who are actually, have video game steering wheels and big
Yep.
rows of monitors and everything else, and they're driving the car. And then you can have simply a system where people are watching the car, just looking through the cameras over the data networks and able to do things like take over if they have one of those steering wheels. This is what I think Tesla has. At least we've seen photographs
Yeah.
suggesting that they have that. You can have, again, someone just watching it with just an emergency stop button. And so all they can do is say, holy crap, we gotta tell this car to stop what it's doing and get to a safe state. Then you have the ability for the car to decide, you know what, I think I'm not fully safe, or I'm not fully confident I can hit our safety target in this situation. So please, human being, give me some advice.
Yeah.
And this advice, in some cases, could be a video game steering wheel, but it's not that. Waymo says they don't have that. They don't have any steering wheels. What they have is a way for someone just at a keyboard, they don't even have a joystick, to give the vehicle some advice. Now, Waymo has never described this. Cruise actually described their system in some detail.
What do
and I
we
think
want to
Waymo's-
call Waymo's people? Or do we call these remote operators?
Yeah,
for
they're
this?
usually called remote
Call
operation
it remote
staff.
operators, or try
Yeah.
to at least.
Yeah. But it is so they're not remote drivers. They are, and remote assistance or advice would be another term
Yeah.
that they would use. Now, the normal way this works, at least it did at Cruise, and this is, I think, a pretty common theme, is the car actually is looking at the situation and it sees, 3 or 4 things to do. And normally it wants to have one that it's 99.99% sure is a good and safe path. But it can't find any that it's that sure of. But it puts up the top 4 or 5 or whatever it is on the screen of the remote assistant. And the remote assistant says, yeah, take the first one. It almost always says take the first one. The car is normally
Usually,
right
right.
about what to do. But sometimes it says there's another one. These are high level plans. They're things like, should I take the second left? Should I make a U-turn and get out of here? Right? Should I back up and so on? Sometimes that's not enough. And so the remote assistance people can give the car waypoints, as it's called. So they get a little map of the area which the car has built, and they click their mouse and say, drive here, then here, then here. And that's your way out. You can get around a pit in the middle of a road or a stalled vehicle if the car cannot figure out how to do that. The car does all the actual steering and avoiding things.
Right.
It's a little bit more like you being in the back of an Uber and telling your Uber driver, take the second left of there. Not that the Uber driver ever listens to you, by the way, when you say this.
Yeah.
In this case, and this is actually a little important, Phil Koopman has making a big bug about this right now, that the car definitely obeys like a robot to the remote assistance operator, so that One of the commands that can happen is the car says, I think I'm stuck at a red, what's going on? And the remote operator says, oh no, it's actually good to go. Go. You think there's a red, but go. Now, a Uber driver might not obey that either, but the car will obey that because this is the human's judgment. This is why we've
They give
paid for the human.
priority to the remote assistant or operator. And I guess bringing it back to this Waymo situation, Waymo said that, okay, we had a bunch of cars that, power lights went out. We normally know how to stop that or how to handle that. And these Waymos got stuck at the traffic lights. So they all kind of called home at the same time, basically, right?
Yeah, or hopefully not exactly at the same time, but when they got to the intersection,
in a much higher
pretty
rates
frequent
than normal. And I think this is important to understand because people were sort of freaking out about this, right? Okay, so Waymo uses these remote assistants in normal average baseline conditions. Let's say they have, well, to be simple, 1,000 cars on the road. We have no idea, right? But let's say they have 50 operators on standby, right? And they know that, okay, at certain times it might spike to 75 or 100. So I'm sure that they've planned for that and they kind of have those standard deviations in their plan. But when it exceeds, 1 or 2 or 3 standard deviations, like in a situation like this, that's when they do not currently have the ability to handle all those requests at once, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I don't actually think they have a ratio as good as 20-1 that you just said. I think that they all plan to get a ratio that's as good as, say, 50-1.
And I mean, the higher the ratio, the better from a financial perspective. So they're probably on the more conservative side, I would say. But I think there was a good point brought up. Oh gosh, I'm totally blanking on who said this, but it was either Jeff Tumlin on a recent interview of mine. But that the companies now have they're starting to get a financial incentive when it comes to safety, right? So eventually they're gonna have to make money, or they're gonna have to kind of trend that ratio, upwards, right? Which would be better for their margins.
By the way, Uber and Uber drivers make money at a 1-to-1 ratio,
right?
And even a 2-to-1 ratio. If you think about Uber drivers who spend all their time idle waiting for rides, when you have a remote driver, for example, as Ray does, you don't need a person while the car is sitting waiting. It's a big advantage over having.
Or even while you're waiting for the passenger to come outside, which Uber drivers know takes 5 minutes.
Even when you're stopped at a traffic light, if you want to get really specific, right? Or anytime you can trust the vehicle to handle everything, which is stopped at a traffic light, you can trust the vehicle beep when the light's about to change, right? So there is actually an economic case at the price that they currently charge, because they charge an Uber-like price for Waymo, even more sometimes. You could actually do it with a small ratio. But everyone's goal, of course, is to get the ratio very good. I had a chat with Kyle Vogt, the CEO of Cruise, just before their failure, when it was leaked how often Cruise was doing remote intervention, which was about every 5 miles, I think it leaked out. And a lot of people said, wow, that's really often. I mean, maybe it was 5 minutes, but it was pretty frequent. I think it was 5 minutes. And everyone's saying, oh my God. And Kyle was like a little bit shocked that people thought that was a bad number. For him, it was exactly where he wanted to be. Right. At that stage in Cruise's life, they were happy to, need one operator for 5 cars or whatever they needed for that thing. So I don't know what number Waymo has. They haven't said what number Waymo has. I know that at most places they would dream that someday they'll have 50-1 and maybe even 100-1. No, I don't think they'll ever get that.
But I guess whatever the number is, I mean, that was the root issue of why all of these Waymos were stalled. It was because they called home, there weren't enough remote, which I think makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So the explanation makes sense. I guess the big thing that came to my mind is, why did they stay stuck right in the middle of the road instead of pulling over and then calling for help, right? Like there's some fail scenario there that I think is, like you said, I guess it's kind of an easy update, but it was like kind of stupid to do that, right? Is there a good reason for them to do that?
I think that they will, they will learn from this. They say they have already learned from it. And, one of the things that they hopefully learn is to make sure that they handle this more gracefully. So the biggest problem for me was not
first quick change you think they could make, that in this type of situation they pull over?
No, there's a whole list. Some of them are not quick. So I maybe that's one of the quicker ones. But remember, they want to stay very safe. And Jeffrey Tumlin actually is interesting. He's changed his tune a bit since when he was running the Muni agency in San Francisco Transportation. He has criticized them for focusing way too much on preventing crashes. right? And, I think they
I
have a
think
reason why
I
they
think he
focus.
said that that is what they're typically judged on, right? When it comes to metrics or
Yeah,
DMV or things like that, right?
right. But that they put as much effort as possible into making sure that they won't hit
Right.
anything. And that sacrifices where they're a little too cautious in front of a fire truck, a little too
Yep.
cautious in an intersection. And he's right that this should be a more subtle, where you put this dial should be more subtle. I think it's interesting to examine what's pushed companies like Waymo to turn that dial the way that he says they've turned it. And he thinks they've turned it too far that way. Now, when he was heading
I
Muni,
mean, it's
he
fair.
was not saying this.
Right. I mean, but it's a fair, I mean, if you're Waymo, it is better to not hit someone and kill someone than to cause traffic backup, right?
Well, for sure. Fortunately, only person who's died was in a crash that Uber ATG had many years ago.
Right.
And it wasn't really involving the self-driving system at all. It was involving the
Sure.
negligent management of the safety driver that they had. But Cruise, of course, did have an incident. They didn't actually hit the person, but after they hit them, and this is very interesting, and we probably do a whole show on just this one particular incident, but the Cruise vehicle, within 500 milliseconds, half a second after it had stopped, after this woman was thrown in front of the Cruise, they immediately started to pull over. Like literally within half a second, they were trying to pull over.
Right.
And Cruise has never said this, but it's pretty clear to me that that's because they were trying to listen to Jeffrey Tillman in advance. They were saying, let's clear the road, because they did not think she was under the car. That was a big mistake they made, that they didn't understand that she could be under the car. And so they went into a mode to say, oh my God, there's been a crash. Let's not block traffic. Let's not block the ambulances and the fire trucks that are going to come through here. And so within half a second, they pull over. Sadly, she lived, but still hurt very badly with someone underneath the vehicle. And so where you tune this dial is really important.
It's a fine
more to the
line
point,
you have to walk.
well, walk's the wrong metaphor here.
Drive.
But yeah, but Cruise is dead because of this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no minor thing. This is
Yeah.
billions of dollars invested by GM, thrown away because the regulators at the DMV said, we don't like what happened. There's two things we don't like. We don't like that you dragged her, and we don't like that you covered it up. They only covered it up for like 2 days. It's like the shortest cover up in history, really, but it was still a cover up. And, just like Watergate for us old people, you don't get in trouble for the crime, you get in trouble for the cover up.
Right.
And they did. But that Cruise was dead, and Uber ATG was also effectively dead from their mistake. So everybody knows you got to make sure that doesn't happen, because everything you're doing and all the good you're going to do, as well as all the money you've spent, is going to be thrown away. And so the message from the regulators, including Tumlin, is turn that dial as far to the left as you can. And he's complaining they've turned it too far. The truth is he played a role in turning it.
Yeah. Well, so I think it is fair to say that Waymo likely, the cars stayed there and stayed in the way because they didn't want to pull over. They didn't want to,
No,
kind of
okay,
get out of the way
let
when
me get
they
to what
didn't
I
know
think
what's going
happened.
on.
And Waymo
Well,
won't confirm this, but here's the thing that I think played a role. One thing you'll notice in these videos, and this is another fact, but we're going to speculate after we deal with the fact, is that the people, the human drivers, they're all acting like crazy, right? They're not treating these things as four-way stops. They're just driving through them. They're certainly rolling, stopping most of them. Some of them are going through pretty fast. Because, the law says when a traffic signal's out, you treat it as a four-way stop. But, humans don't obey the law.
Yeah.
The robot does, but the human doesn't. And so what we get is a normal intersection. People are just, this light's out. We'll be careful here. But once you've gone through 10 lights that are out, you're just, what the hell? I just got to get out of here. I mean, everything's blocked up. I'm late.
Especially, Brad, if you see a Waymo, like if I'm tired, I've done 10 and I see a Waymo, I'm cutting right in front, like, see a Waymo, I'm going in front of you. Right.
So this is happening. So that part's a fact. We know the humans are doing that. And what they're doing, though, is this is something Waymo didn't anticipate, that suddenly all the humans in the city would go crazy and ignore the law. And so I think if you've programmed a vehicle to be cautious, no, actually, you've programmed to do two things. You've said you're at a four-way stop. Assert yourself. You got to take your turn. So you say, okay, it's my turn. Right. We count the cars coming. It's my turn. I advance into the intersection because that's what I got to do. And normally what happens there is either, people, robots won't play chicken. Humans will play chicken at a four-way stop. That's, but robots won't play chicken. They'll go forward. But as soon as someone else is coming, they'll stop. And I think these cars all concluded all very quickly, oh my crap, the humans have gone nuts.
Yeah.
This is definitely the kind of time where I better ask for my human masters to give me a hand. And so what Waymo wasn't ready for was that 100 cars at once would all say,
Mhm.
what the hell's going on here? The humans are crazy.
Right,
And
they're
so
at a
that overloaded
four-way
their
stop
system.
sign, and they're expecting people to stop, and everyone's literally just driving through it. The cars might be thinking, "Hey, is the light actually green on the other way?" And I don't know. You know what I mean? So
Well,
that
I
I think
actually, I don't
that
think the cars think that.
well, I
I
know
think
they
they
don't
just,
think that, but like something very odd is happening is basically what you're saying, which I think is very fair. And the Waymos are saying, let's call home and get a confirmation. So I think that makes
and I
sense.
gotta say that if what would we want a Waymo to do when it sees a crazy situation that makes no
Yeah.
sense? We'd want it to call home for advice. We just wouldn't want 200 of them to call back at once when they don't
Well,
have 200 people there to deal with it.
I think it's okay. Okay, so let's get into that in a second. I think it's okay that they called back in that situation where there's 100, 200, because there's a million unknowns that could be happening. And if it's, I think that we want them calling home in that situation. I do think, though, that in that situation, that exactly what you described, they could still pull over. They could still get out of the
Well,
way. They could reverse. They could get the hell
so
out of the way. So
this
that's
is
an
their
easy,
this is their failure in that. So normally what happens is the car gets into a situation, it's confused, it calls home, and normally within 10, 15 seconds, they have an answer, right? So you don't pull over when you're
yeah,
expecting an
sure.
answer within 10 seconds. That would make traffic worse if the cars always pulled over
Back
when
and
they got
forth. Yeah.
confused, right? They got to stop in the middle of intersection when they're just expecting it. And what Waymo wasn't ready for was that the advice wouldn't come,
Hmm.
right? Now, I actually think this is an irony. Waymo hasn't confirmed this. It may or may not be true, but they're ready for a communications failure. Cruise had a problem at Outside Lands, a big conference or concert in
Yeah.
Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, where the cell phone network got overloaded and the cruises were all waiting for advice and they all froze
Yeah.
up. And so that's not a secret. Everybody knows that that can happen. We saw it happen to Cruise. I got to believe Waymo had a meeting and said, what do we do here? And they worked out solutions for it. I think if the cell phone networks had gone out, we wouldn't have had this problem. I think the cars would have gone into a cell phone networks are out mode, power's out mode. We better pull over. We're not going
Yeah.
to get any help. It's the
Yeah.
fact that they asked for help and
That makes
Daddy
sense.
didn't answer, and they're just
Rainbow
going.
Daddy. That's pretty good.
That's my best guess as to what
Yeah.
happened. And
I think
what
that
Waymo will
makes
have learned
sense.
from this is, okay, we got to be ready for that. Well,
I
we
think
got to be ready for that two ways. We got to
I
be
think it's
ready
an
in
easy
being.
fix, Brad. I think it's, hey, let's call
It might
home.
be.
10 to 15 seconds, no answer, pull over. I think that's a pretty easy fix.
I mean, well, pullover is pretty difficult in
Get out of the
in
way.
that, in that yeah. So the problem is, again, they don't want to make a move unless they're 99.999% certain nobody's going to
Right.
get hit by it. And again, this is a situation which wasn't, for better or worse, anticipated. Now, my article actually focused more on why didn't they know this was going to happen? Because I think I came up with this explanation in part because I was trying to figure out. I know these guys. I work with them. They're very top people.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I don't think they would have not considered a big power failure, for example. I would hope that they've considered earthquakes and all bad storms and all the bad things that are going to happen. I don't think they have experience with them. This was the first time they had to actually deal with it on the ground. No battle plan survives first contact with
Yep.
the enemy. But I think that there's a bunch of things they could do. I
Okay,
think
so
they should be
let's,
able to handle high volumes of requests. By the way, that will also just solve itself naturally as they scale. Because right now, Waymo's in 10 cities, but they're really, most of their activity is San Francisco, Phoenix, and LA. And once you're in 100 cities, you've got, and one city has been blown up by a, terrorist attack. It doesn't matter. The other
well,
99
unless
cities.
there's, EMP that affects all 100 cities. Don't never say never, Brad.
Okay. Sorry. In a major nuclear war,
I'm not talking nuclear war, but
I don't hate this.
I feel like in tech, I
EMP in 100 cities is a
I
nuclear
don't know.
war, my
Okay,
friend.
I don't know, but like in tech, everyone, I'm very optimistic. I work with a lot of founders, and they always say, "Oh, that can never happen." I'm like, dude, it's gonna happen. Like people are almost like in tech, they're a little too optimistic. You kind of need, whenever I work with startups, I tell them like, it's kind of good to have someone like me who doesn't work at the company. I don't care how long you've worked on this product or how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into it. You release something and it's a stupid idea, I'm going to tell you. Or if you don't think about like, someone's going to abuse it, fraud, what can go wrong? Like, I never like the solution. Like, oh, that probably won't happen. I never like.
So, but here's what I would think would happen as you build up to being at big scale with 100 cities. You naturally have much more wiggle room in your capacity of your remote assistance people.
Fair.
Secondly, you have all the people who are off shift, right? And I'm guessing maybe they didn't have a system, but you want to have a system that says, wake up, the people who are off shift, because we got this big, pay them some fat overtimes because you
I
had to wake
mean, how
them up.
about the
Or,
Waymo employees? Like, hey guys,
all right,
they should probably all be
Dmitry
trained on,
Dolgov,
you know,
Dmitry Dolgov and every other Waymo engineer. Waymo has 3,000
right.
employees. Alphabet has 200,000 employees. Get them trained at doing low-level support, basic triage, that kind of thing. And
And that'll be a great
phone,
Business Insider story anyways. You know, this Waymo engineer spends his nights and weekends doing remote support to learn about the company.
well,
So,
no, this should be something is, you get called for this, once in
yeah,
a decade, right? It's not you can pay very fat overtime for this and justify people
sure.
to take training. You don't need that much training. I've actually been pondering over this. They do not use, as far as I know, VR glasses, for example, for this
Yeah.
remote assistance task, because VR glasses are uncomfortable to wear for a long time. There's a lot of reasons not to use them. But actually, one thing they're very good at is bringing a person up to speed on the situation, right? We can put you in there. You can
Yeah.
look
So
around
they
5
should
seconds.
have a plan to scale up remote operators 10
Yeah.
or 100x at a moment's notice. I think that maybe should have already been in place at this. Do you think it should have been already been like that's kind of obvious to me, right? Like Uber has surge pricing. Hey, when there's a big demand and big spike in demand, right? We have a bunch more drivers.
Well,
Like,
yeah, I'm gonna say that they haven't spoken about this, but obviously they didn't have something that worked.
right.
They might have had a plan. That plan might have run into problems. They might have not had enough plan. I think that's one of the lessons that will be learned from this. And but
And
I
of
have to
course, it's
believe,
easy for us to sit here
yeah,
in our chair. Oh, they should have done this. They should have done that. But so we're definitely being probably extra critical. But I think Waymo probably rightfully should be held to a very high standard.
they should be. So they do simulation. They do a lot of simulation of the vehicle driving down the road. They haven't spoken much about the other type of simulation you want to do, which is whole fleet simulation, where you can't be simulating the individual cars very well, but you can simulate things that happen to the whole fleet like this. And I am surprised that whatever simulation they did didn't help uncover this as a contingency. And, they're probably surprised too. But I
I mean,
haven't
power
seen too
outages are
much.
pretty common, right? This
No,
is
so I
not
got to
a-
believe they
so
gained power outages.
they definitely planned for a power outage for sure. That's probably got to be the number one thing on the edge case list. It's not even really an edge case. They planned for a power outage, but
And
since
for an earthquake, which is power
earthquake, I
outages,
bet what they
roads
didn't plan
destroyed.
for, Brad, I think your theory is the right one. I bet what they didn't plan for is humans driving like psychos, basically treating four-way stops like the lights are actually not out. They are working right on the other ways.
Now, by the way, I think they have a very hard problem ahead of them, because when they want to be ready to handle an earthquake or a hurricane or some of these other big disasters, which will come, they're in Miami now, they'll get a hurt. The easy solution is the one they took here, which is let's shut down and pull off to the side of the road. Because they eventually did do that, get them all back to depots. That is not the best solution in an emergency. There's going to be eventually people who depend on these vehicles for the transportation, and they're not going to want to say, sorry, bad weather, we're off today. That's not going to be an acceptable solution.
That I kind of keep seeing, right? Okay, you mentioned, right, Waymo, flooding. All right, Waymo's, we've kind of, they've been made fun of, right? They the cars like to drive through flooding. They haven't quite figured that one out. So now when there's heavy rains or flooding, they pull them off the road, like you mentioned a few days after. But, one thing we see with Uber drivers, actually during inclement weather and, even sometimes during natural disasters and things, like people actually they need to get the hell out of Dodge. They need to get out of there, right? So like, it's not actually a great long-term solution, pausing service completely and leaving people stranded or whatever it might be, right?
But I think this is very early in the history of the robotaxis.
Yeah.
And so I don't fault them, and I certainly can't fault the others who don't even have fleets like Waymo does, that their plan is not complete here yet.
Well, I think
they know
right now.
They know they've got to do this, but they can't use the conservative, the very timid solution is stop and don't take any risks. The precautionary principle sort of applied here. And that's not going to work forever, but they need to make you obviously cannot test your earthquake response in anything but simulator. Right. I mean, because the other approach is let's wait for some earthquakes and see what happens. Not so great.
I mean, definitely earthquake has got to be
I've got to believe they would have simulated a power outage, but they obviously, simulations are not perfect. They didn't catch what was going to happen here. And so I'm a little disappointed, though, that they didn't do enough of what's called red teaming. Red teaming is when you have a deliberate team of adversaries who try to break your system, usually in cybersecurity, but it can happen in all other fields. And there should have been people trying to say, okay, what would break this? What's it take to break us? What if we got 1,000 support requests? And someone else would say, oh, we'll never get 1,000 support requests. Yeah, and like you said, never say it can never happen.
Right.
The red team's job is to say that, in fact, to even show how it could happen
Mhm.
and stress test the crap out of it.
Yeah. So, was there anything else more broadly about Waymo's actions or response? Because I think the kind of subjective, the reason why I wanted to even interview, I feel like the story has really, kind of kept going. We're at a couple weeks now, almost 2 weeks that we're talking now.
Not as
People
much
are,
as running over a cat, but
I don't know. I think this is up there. And, what I've seen kind of anecdotally is that, I think even people like you and I think you and I are both big Waymo fans. I would say, maybe not boosters, but very positive outlook on the industry and the company. I think you and I have both sort of said, expressed disappointment or Waymo, could have done this better or that better. I think even a lot of the Waymo customers, the tech VCs and the people in San Francisco who are usually the biggest fans of Waymo, I've seen them, kind of making comments like, wow, how did Waymo screw this up? Right. So that's kind of one
yeah,
thing I've noticed. I wasn't in love
it's
with
like
their
the scene in
response.
it's like the scene in The Man Who Would Be King, right? And, oh my God, a God who bleeds.
Yeah. But like
Right.
like I come
We
like if
thought
this
they
was
were
Tesla,
imperfect and immortal.
Brad, if this was Tesla, everyone would have been like, "Oh, they did great," right? But like the Waymo fans in this one, like they kind of rightfully called out Waymo, and I was proud of them
Yeah.
for saying that. I did not love Waymo's response. I don't think it really
No.
provided much that they already kind of gave that comment to a couple outlets that said, okay, yeah, we basically had too many requests all at once. Like the blog post didn't really say much in my mind. Let's talk about Waymo's kind of response or the reaction to it more broadly.
Well, my advice to Cruise, to Waymo, to all of these companies might be bad advice, and they don't want to take it. But yes, to be more transparent and make
Yeah.
every story not about the fact that we made a mistake. To say, listen, we made mistakes. We're going to make more. What you
Yeah.
should care about is, are we fixing them? Will they never happen again? And that means explaining how the mistake happened and explaining how you fixed it. And in many cases, Waymo's press releases around the other mistakes that they've made have said, we've already fixed this. Right. So
Right.
there was a big one about school buses earlier this month,
Hmm.
which they got a NHTSA investigation from. They had a flaw. They didn't they were misjudging whether the school bus was stopped with its stop sign out. And so they were driving past the school bus. And that's against the law.
Yeah.
And then, now I got a lot of people angry at me for saying, yes, it's against the law. And so they should definitely fix it. But I mean,
Change the
should
law.
it be against the law? It isn't against the law in most countries, by the way.
That's
But in the
funny.
United States and Canada, it is. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. And people think I'm absolutely insane about this. But I like to push the edge, and that's fine. But they got when they released that, they said, yes, we did go by these school buses. We're sorry, very sorry about that. It's fixed. Right.
Right.
That's why the idea of these, people say it was a recall. So a recall is a term of art in auto regulation law that's involved that NHTSA has. It's not a recall. It's just yet another software update. They do software update every week. And this one fixed that bug. But, again, human beings, they're not robots that, problems fixed. And by the way, the great thing is that if the other companies like Tesla, well, actually, maybe not like Tesla, we can get into them in a second, but, like the Chinese companies, May Mobility, Zoox, that are operating, anytime something happens to Waymo, you can bet they're having a meeting saying, would we do that? What would happen
Yeah.
with us? And they fix it before it even happens. So that's kind of a little bonus for them. So not just the company that has the problem fixes the problem. Everyone fixes the problem.
Mhm.
Nobody. Now, when I was at Waymo, I wrote an essay. This is back in like 2012, saying we must never drag somebody. And
Yeah.
I put to the case of how the dragging someone under the car would be, the public would just never accept it. I knew that. I don't think it's a genius thing to have known it. It's pretty obvious that that's the case. And I asked the Cruise people, I mean, did no one say that inside Cruise? And they said, no, we said that. Just a whole bunch of other things happened so that we didn't think we were dragging somebody. But the point is that when Cruise dragged that woman, every other company did a double check to make sure, could that happen to us? And
Right.
so nobody will ever have happened to them what happened to that Cruise.
So, am I being too hard on Waymo, you think? I mean, like their response, like I guess I would have liked to have more info, more
Yeah,
kind of
no.
transparency around what happened. I was a little disappointed.
I would like them to take this stance, maybe partly because I want to write about it, but I just think in general, the problem is I do understand their fear, and I think there is merit to their fear that the public will go nuts with the truth sometimes. Now, I criticize them about the fact that when they did hit this cat in the Mission District in San Francisco, that they left out the fact that there was a pedestrian who came by and tried to get the cat to come out and stood in front of the car. And as soon as she walked away, that's when the car started moving, because the car has an absolute no-go when there's a human in front of me, but it doesn't really understand about a cat that's hiding underneath the car and totally invisible to the sensors. Maybe they could have figured out the cat was still in the car. They couldn't see it. Now, one of the things that I said, but Waymo never said this, but looking in the NHTSA data, Waymo has hit about 5 cats in 130 million miles. So I went to look up what the number was for humans, and humans in that distance would hit 150 cats. Right? So if you want Waymo off the roads because it hit this cat, and I've had 3 cats that were hit by humans, it's not that I don't feel how terrible it is to lose a pet like that, but if you want Waymo off the roads because they hit that cat, I might say to you, why do you hate cats so much? Right? You want humans, because all those humans who are riding the back of Waymo would switch to being behind the wheel or in Ubers. And unfortunately, a lot of animals would be struck because of that. And so you got to put this in perspective.
Definitely got to look at it on an absolute basis.
But to finish my sentence, I am going on too long, which is, it's pretty clear that in spite of those unassailable numbers, the public's reaction is, oh my God, they killed a kitty. And so that gives them the fear of being honest about it, because some members of the public would say these things aren't ready for prime time because they're not perfect. And if people say that, if if the DMV bans you from the roads because of serious mistake, well, then everything is lost, and they have a good reason to be afraid of that.
Yeah. So final topic that I want to ask you and discuss is the regulation piece of things, because this kind of is something that I wrote. I feel like Waymo is kind of asking for regulation here. I think they really, they haven't disclosed what the remote operator ratios are. They didn't really give a lot of info into what happened here. Like, if I'm a regulator, like, I'm pretty worried about this situation and future disasters. Like, I really want to know that Waymo didn't handle this first one very well. Like, I guess I want to know, like, hey, okay, Waymo says they didn't have enough remote operators. So I want to make sure they have enough next time. At a minimum, well, not at a minimum, but like the most safe has to be 1-to-1, right? One remote operator for one car would be, if I'm a regulator and I wanted I didn't care about the business or whatever, I wanted the safest roads possible, but I wanted them to operate, I would say 1-to-1. And also kind of nearby, I want these remote operators nearby in the US licensed, because I don't love the idea of someone in the Philippines remote operating. They've never driven on the roads of San Francisco. Like, it's pretty different in one country to another. I'm starting at, if I'm a regulator and I'm pissed at Waymo right now because they didn't do a very good job here, that's like my starting negotiation point, basically. Like, hey, Waymo, this is what I want. I don't know. What do you think about from a regulatory perspective?
Well, I admit I have a view on regulation that I don't think is mainstream, but I think it's right, of course. And I think that regulation should always start from goals. Well, what's our goal, right? So we start with the goal of, we want to improve road safety. We want to improve throughput on the roads. We want pleasant streets, all of the goals that we have for public goods, missions and access and all the things. We list those goals. And then we say, how do we make the companies that are going to play in this aligned with these goals? How do we make them very afraid not to reach these goals and very much want them? And that's not enough. This is not a complete solution. But this says that focus mostly on that, and only if you can't make that work do you actually tell them how to do it, right? Because you suck at figuring out how to do it. Waymo didn't deliberately, like, if you found out that Waymo had, in order to save money, not had enough remote operators, that they had a budget meeting and they said, oh, well, that many remote operators would cost us way too much. I don't believe that happened at all. I think they did the best job they could at figuring out how many they needed, and they were wrong. Right. But I have no reason to believe regulators would do any better a job at figuring out that number, other than to deliberately make it high because they don't care about cost at all. I don't think Waymo cares about cost at all. None of the players today care about cost. They care about a path towards a profitable margin, but they don't care that they get that today. Now, in China, the regulations do actually mandate how many remote operators you have per vehicle. And when you get your first permit in China, you get 1-to-1 is written on your permit. And I think I was talking to Baidu about this. They don't want to say what they have because the nice thing about China is you can confirm it can be secret and stuff. It's a different kind of
Yeah.
world. But I think they're sort of at 5-1 or something, I think is where they, and Baidu Apollo is the best performing of the
Yep.
Chinese operators. So but I don't think we want Chinese style regulation. I want us to what I want to know is, are these companies motivated by the public goals that we have, safety and road citizenship and all these other things? Is there anything that would incentivize them to go other than that? Let's fix that. And then I would ask, not what mistakes are they making or have they made? Are they improving? Are they going to really be doing, best efforts to be better and put us on that upward path? And otherwise, I would mostly let them figure it out, because they are still figuring it out. And I can't imagine the regulators making the right decisions.
Yeah.
So that's not something regulators agree with when I say it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a new law that's about to go into effect on food delivery. If any piece or part of the order is wrong, you now get a full refund, which is got to be one of the stupidest, kind of good at heart, right? But one of the stupidest laws I've heard from regulators lately, because now a bunch of people are going to fraudulently report, oh, my fries were missing or my ketchup, to try and get the
Well,
full
I've
refund
heard a lot of Uber
back.
Eats drivers do eat your fries.
I mean, they do, but at the end of the day, right? It's a product. If you're enjoying the product, use it. If you're not, don't. I don't really know why you need regulators in that case. In this case, I think it's I had someone ask me, why was this even such a big issue? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, right? If there's a bunch of Waymos stuck in the road and a natural disaster or power outage, like not a good thing. And then imagine if there's thousands or tens of thousands of these, right?
So if you can conclude that Waymo is not properly motivated to handle disasters like outages, then it makes sense for regulation to come in and say, let us change your motivations. Let's make, and maybe let's even get involved in how you run your business. Although again,
So
I don't
do you
think
think
that'll work
this
very
was
well.
enough of a wake-up call for Waymo that if I was a city regulator, I would sort of just trust them to do the right thing the next time around?
I might ask them, please tell me what you've done.
Yeah.
So you decide what to do. You tell us.
Yeah, I
We
think
tell
that's a
the
good starting
public
point.
how do you know this won't happen again? And if Waymo's honest about that, they'll say, we can't absolutely be sure this won't happen again. There's going to be
Give us
something else that will come up
specifics.
that nothing happened. But we're going to do the best job, maybe not the best job that anyone can do, but we're going to do a grade A job at figuring this out. And you telling us how to, because I'll tell you something. Unfortunately, the regulation attempts so far have not been well crafted or successful. They have put in a requirement that disengagements be reported.
Right.
And that didn't work at all, right? Everybody just figured out what they would call a disengagement, and we got
Mhm.
numbers we couldn't compare. And it's a requirement that you give all the details of any incident you're in. It's very useful, but Tesla just draws a
Right,
black
they redact
box
everything.
around anything interesting. It's not, you can't break through it like the Epstein files, right? So, although someone blamed Elon Musk for the fact that the Epstein files redactions, you could undo them
Yeah.
because Elon cut the budget for them to buy
Photoshop.
the pro version of Adobe Acrobat. And so they have the cheap version where you can't fully redact. Anyway, so it's secretly Elon's fault that happened. However, that's the track record is poor here.
Yeah.
And I think you want to work together with the teams. I
Mhm.
definitely think you start with transparency requirements, right? But it's actually a very tough job to write a transparency requirement that will actually work. I have proposed a system that maybe could work, although it's only for incidents. It's not for things like I got stuck in the intersection.
Well, it's hard. And that's where I think there's sort of more binary situations, right? Where like I killed someone, I hit someone,
Yeah.
but what about these like I'm blocking a fire truck situations, right? Like how do you track that? Is it through 311 calls? Like I think that's where Waymo really needs to, kind of have a little more or a lot more transparency. So I actually like this, kind of ending on a positive note. I don't think we need to come after Waymo with the regulatory pitchforks just yet, but I do think it is important. Okay, we gave them a few days. They had this blog post after the incident. I don't know when a reasonable time frame, maybe a month. I'd say a month is probably plenty of time. This should be a pretty important issue that they should, kind of release some more data. They should release some more finding, what they're going to do to prevent this. And if I'm a city regulator, I'm emailing them right now and say, hey, let me know when you're going to do this. Otherwise, I'm
I'd
emailing
hazard
Brad.
they probably will build an emergency preparedness report. They have these big reports about their interface with emergency responders and everything else.
Yeah.
But let's be clear, by the way, we said this at the beginning of it. Nobody was in danger here. Okay.
Yeah.
And, some traffic that was already snarled got a little more snarled. In the grand scale of disasters, this one's pretty milquetoast. So
Right, but I think it could have easily been an earthquake, right? An earthquake could be coming the next time, and in that situation, I think, maybe actual lives are on the line, right?
So they should, I think making a statement about what they've done for emergency preparedness
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. And it makes sense the
So if they
state to
released
demand that.
Yeah, if they released a report that's like, hey, here's the top 5 edge cases, failure modes that we are preparing for in a situation of an earthquake. Here's what we are expecting to happen, and here's how we are planning on handling it. They don't need to release, all their private data around remote operator ratios. But, like you said, they say, hey, we normally have a certain ratio of remote operators. And in the event of an earthquake, we have the ability to draw in employees, our secondary workforce, off shift, whatever. And then people can kind of publicly poke holes in that before it happens.
Right.
I like that.
And even the regulators can have opinions on it. I don't think it's time for them to like set minimum bars and stuff yet.
Right.
But let's also put another thing in perspective. All right. So yes, these companies all want to make a lot of money and they have profit motive, and we have to, bend it back towards the public good from time to time. And that's the role of regulation, to figure out what those goals are.
Mm-hmm.
But Waymo says they're having 1/6 the injuries of ordinary human drivers.
Yeah.
Which is that they've already reached a very important bar, and it's a great bar to reach. So as Waymo scales and starts deploying a lot of things, we're talking about a pretty serious decrease in the number of deaths and injuries and property damage. And I'm not talking about small numbers. I'm talking over years and across the world, millions of lives, billions of injuries and trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
You start talking about a trillion here, a trillion there, you're starting to talk about real money, to paraphrase the old joke about a billion. Now, the more we delay this, and this is a chilling number, but because these million people who will die if we don't deploy robotaxis, they're not going to be killed by anyone we're going to see. They're just going to be killed by drunk humans, right? We don't like being killed by robots. We'd much rather be killed by drunks. We're kind of funny that way. That's what's going to happen. So we won't know who to blame. We won't say, okay, oh, you died because they didn't let these robotaxis out on the road. You declared they were not ready for prime time. You wanted them to be more cautious. I think in order to get them to be cautious, they should be cautious. And, oh no, a few people got blocked on the road. Well, you know who blocks way more fire trucks than Waymos? People.
Well, I don't know, do they? I mean, people, I think, in that situation
No, people are in the way.
They know to
fire
get out of the
trucks
way
all the time. Yeah, they know to get out. Oh, come on!
I mean,
you've never
they
been,
don't block.
You've
them
never
in
been
the
driving
same-
down. You've
They
had a
don't
fire truck
block
come
them in
behind
the
you, and
same
everybody
way.
pulled over. Did they?
I mean, they don't block them in the same way where it's literally stuck there for 15 seconds, right? Maybe they block them for a second or two, or here and there. But I get your larger point that obviously, there's a lot of potential here. I think that's why you and I are both so excited and bullish on the industry. So it is important to keep that potential in mind, and that's sort of where I like the regulatory approach, a little more hands off. Waymo has a lot of the right incentives on their own, so let's give them a little time and let's ask them for some more information, some more transparency, and see what they do.
But keep it in perspective, right? And don't because we have a natural desire as human beings to focus on incidents, especially tragedies. And it's just the way we're built, and we're probably not going to change that. But policymakers have a job to look at the big picture, the statistics. They have to look at the future that they're trying to build. And they should not say, oh my God, they gummed up traffic, so let's get them off the roads, or let's make it much harder for them to do their job, when the real goal is so much bigger than a bit of gummed up traffic. I mean, I think in the long run, there's a lot of arguments about this, of course, whether robotaxis are going to make traffic worse or better. We could do 2 other or 3 other programs about where that goes. But for now, I think there's a lot of potential, and we want to let it flower as much as we can. If someone's doing something that's obviously dangerous, if we can see that they're not aligned with the public interest, then we should use the power of the law to change that. But I don't think we want the regulators, even the smartest regulators, to be saying, here's how to do your job.
I think that's a great note to end on. Brad, Happy New Year, and thank you so much for coming on to discuss the great Waymo outage of 2025. Hopefully, won't have to do this in 2026 or in the future. I know you write a bunch on Forbes, so we'll leave a link to your profiles there, and very active on LinkedIn. So
Forbes
easy to
insists
find.
Forbes insists I say Forbes.com because it doesn't go in the magazine.
Forbes.com. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Have a great New Year.
See you soon.